Hello there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 237, The Shaping of Middle-earth. Greta, what's up?
Hey, what is up? Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. What's up with you?
Not a whole lot. Just waiting for the intro music to end as usual.
Surely we can do better than this.
Well, I just need to shorten it at some point, get my act together.
Wow.
Yeah. Got a lot of things to get my act together on, but let's talk about this episode.
Yeah,
on this
let's do
episode,
that.
we are continuing our journey through the History of Middle-earth series as we survey Volume 4, The Shaping of Middle-earth.
The Shaping of Middle-earth.
Yeah,
Okay.
So that is what's the plan for this here episode.
Is there going to be like a lot of geography in this one?
No, not really.
Okay, good.
It's
Because I was about to piece out if there was.
there is some, but it's not a lot. So
Okay.
It's not the majority of it.
There's like a good balance.
Well, it's not even the majority of it, but you'll see. Jumping the gun. Jumping ahead.
What I do.
Jumping ahead of our patrons. Come on.
Oh, that's
Man,
not
that's
right.
so messed up.
Shame on me.
Before we get started, we'd like to give a shout out to our patrons and a big special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien, Elise Yu, Andrew T, John R, and Ms. Anonymous.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our amazing patrons. You too can become a patron of the Tolkien Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Becoming a patron lets you support the show in a tangible way and land you some awesome perks, like audio recordings of my two books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Check it out now to learn more about all of the exciting perks we offer. And don't forget, you can now make an annual pledge and get 1 month free. So,
Oh, I didn't realize that deal was still going on.
yeah,
That's
still
good.
going on. That's the deal.
That's a good
For
one.
you make an annual pledge, you get 1 month free.
Oh,
right?
it's like I thought it was
Now
just like a limited time.
initially I did 2 months free, but that was just for that the early adopters there.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, still 1 month free. That's not a bad deal.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty. You save in 1 month, getting 12 months for 11 months price. That's what I'm talking about.
That's right. It's like a Costco gift card where you pay like $45 for a $50 gift card.
Okay.
It's pretty much the best deal going. Well, besides becoming a patron of Tolkien Road, obviously. Anyway.
You totally messed that up, man.
No, I didn't. I totally wrapped it up, tied it with a string.
I mean, you compared this work of genius and art to the commodities of Costco.
You know what? You get a gift card to the right restaurant. There's genius and art in that as well.
Moving on.
Cannot argue with that. That's why we're moving
Hey,
on.
you also need right this second, to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes and other podcasting platforms. Leaving us a 5-star rating and a review helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road.
Indeed.
So do that.
Please.
And then check out our YouTube channel. Just visit tolkienroad.com/YouTube. We are all of our episodes are now in video form. So just instead of just listening to us blab on about Tolkien, you can watch us blab on about Tolkien.
Engaging an additional sense there.
And really, I must say that in terms of the, just the utter appreciation of an episode of the Tolkien Road, you really need to see the subtleties of our facial expressions to really understand what we're trying to communicate. So
True. It's true.
you need to do yourself a favor and become a subscriber on our YouTube channel as well, so that you can see these episodes and just know all of the amazing facial expressions that you are missing out on. So
Indeed.
mm-hmm.
Yep. It's
looking at my guitars and seeing what t-shirt I'm wearing. So yeah.
I'm not wearing a cool t-shirt today. My t-shirts are normally cooler than yours though.
Well, I guess it depends on what you think is cool.
Well, you've bought most of
If
them
you think
for
lame
me,
stuff's
so
cool, then I guess you're right.
whatever. You've bought me most of those t-shirts, so maybe it's your taste that's lame.
Oh, sorry. Were you saying something? I was taking a drink of water.
I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it is now. Oh, well.
All right. Well, the point is, subscribe to us on YouTube.
You'll get the full experience if you
Mhm.
subscribe to us on YouTube.
Right on.
That's what we're trying to say. And then you can actually see me slap John instead of just hear me slap John next time I get the urge.
That is worth the price of admission alone. And you can leave comments super easy on YouTube as well. So, just do it.
do it.
Let's do it.
You have nothing to lose.
All right. And hey, shout out to people who are watching us on YouTube right now. We love you.
Sup.
All right. Stick around to the end of the episode for correspondence. Greta, you ready to dive in?
Yep.
All right.
I am.
So in this episode, we will be providing a brief overview of The Shaping of Middle-earth, which is the 4th volume in the History of Middle-earth series. It was published in 1986. You can see here, because you're watching on video, my copy of The Shaping of Middle-earth, this mass market paperback, which is not what I would recommend to be the normal format that you read Tolkien in, because the print is very small, and especially with these works, it makes it very challenging even to just like do research and keep the book open like this while you're trying to type notes like I was as I prepared for this episode. But that's really beside the point. What's important is the content in here. This was published in 1986. The preface. All right. So let's read a little snippet from the preface. The preface isn't super long, a couple of pages, but here's what Christopher has to say about this volume. This is the stage at which my father had arrived when The Hobbit was written, so roughly 1936, 1937, the mid-30s. Comparison of the Quenta with the published Silmarillion will show that the essential character of the work was now fully in being. In the shape and fall of sentences, even of whole passages, the one is constantly echoed in the other, and yet the published Silmarillion is between 3 and 4 times as long. After the hasty sketch of the mythology, chapter 2 in this book, the Quenta Silmarillion was in fact the only complete version of the Silmarillion that my father ever made. Towards the end of 1937, he interrupted work on a new version, Quenta Silmarillion, which extended into partway through the story of Turin Turambar and began The Lord of the Rings. When after many years he returned to the first stage, the vast extension of the world that had now come into being meant that the Quenta Silmarillion, which had been stopped in full flight, could not be taken up from where it fell. And though he undertook exceedingly complex revisions and enlargements of the earlier parts during the following years, he never achieved again a complete and coherent structure. Especially in its concluding chapters, the Quenta Noldorwina is thus one of the primary elements in the study of the work as a whole. So there's more to it than that. But basically, what to take away from this preface is that this is as far as Tolkien had gotten with the Legendarium by the time The Hobbit was published. And of course, it wasn't too much longer after The Hobbit was published that he began work on Lord of the Rings, right, as the new Hobbit, as the sequel to The Hobbit. So, and really what you're going to see with this work, this is where, the Legendarium starts to kind of take a little bit more of a familiar cohesion in terms of binding it all together, right? When we looked at the Book of Lost Tales, there were a lot of these tales that were bound together by this frame narrative of the Cottage of Lost Play, and all these characters on, what island were they on? Anyway, I forgot the name of the island because I'm dumb. But they were on, they were bound together with this frame narrative, the Cottage of Lost Play, with various characters, various elvish men, characters telling these lost tales, right? Then with the Annals of Beleriand, we had these poetic versions of 2 of the more significant tales of Beleriand, with the Lay of Lythian, aka the Tale of Tinuviel, and then the Children of Húrin, right, and some other snippets that we saw in there. But with this is where Tolkien. What we find here is that Tolkien is kind of putting that all together and looking back and saying, okay, these are the stories that I wrote and I started to map out. And he's starting to take the time to explain these things to others and realizing that he might need to explain these things to others at some point in the not too distant future. So that's kind of the idea that we have with this. There are 7 chapters in this work. The titles of these chapters are Prose Fragments Following the Lost Tales. Chapter 2 is the earliest Silmarillion, aka the sketch of the mythology. Chapter 3 is the Quenta. Chapter 4 is the first Silmarillion map. Chapter 5 is the Ambarkanta. Chapter 6 is the earliest Annals of Valinor, and Chapter 7 is the earliest Annals of Beleriand. So, Chapter 1, Prose Fragments Following the Lost Tales. This is a pretty short chapter. So, as you can tell from the chapter, these are simply fragments. This isn't any particularly long work here. What Christopher says at the beginning, he says, before giving the sketch of the mythology, the earliest form of the prose Silmarillion, there are some brief prose texts that can be conveniently collected here. And so basically there are 3 of these, right? Each of them consists of a couple of pages in this book. And the three fragments are from Torlin and the Exiles of Gondolin, right? So this would be a fragment, a prose fragment from a post Gondolin, Fall of Gondolin's story, a Tale of the Gnomes, and then the Flight of the Noldoli, right?
Okay.
So not terribly long. Not going to spend a whole lot of time looking closely at these, but that's what you have in the first chapter here. The second chapter is where it starts to get a little more interesting. The earliest Silmarillion. This is the sketch of the mythology. This is what a little bit from what Christopher has to say at the beginning of this chapter. He says the sketch represents a new. When he refers to the sketch, he's referring. So this is titled "The Earliest Silmarillion" or "The Sketch of the Mythology," and he refers to it often as the sketch in here. So the sketch represents a new starting point in the history of the Silmarillion. For while it is a quite brief synopsis, the further written development of the prose form proceeded from it in a direct line. It is clear from details that need not be repeated here that it was originally written in 1926, after the Lay of the Children of Húrin had been abandoned, but it was afterwards revised in places very heavily, and this makes it a difficult text to present in a way that is both accurate and readily comprehensible. The method I have adopted is to give the text exactly as it was first written, apart from a very few slight alterations of expression in no way affecting the narrative, which are adopted silently into the text, but to break it up into short sections, following each with notes given the later changes made in that section. I must emphasize that there is no manuscript warrant for the 19 divisions so made. It is purely a matter of convenience of presentation. This method has certain advantages. The later changes can be readily compared with the original text immediately preceding, and since the following version of the Silmarillion, the Quenta, has been treated in the same way and divided into corresponding numbered sections, passages of the one can be easily related to those in the other. The later changes are referenced by numbers that begin with 1 in each section. The commentary follows at the end of the complete text and is related to the numbered sections. So basically, to summarize what Christopher just said there, this is kind of a summary of the stories of the Legendarium, right? That Tolkien himself wrote, and then Christopher comes along, takes that, and divides that into 19 a little more easily digestible sections. And as you can see here, Greta, I mean, we're talking basically, we talk sections, we're talking like a few paragraphs,
Yeah,
right?
they're not very long.
They're not very long at all. And then he provides some notes after each of those sections. So the divisions are Christopher's, but the text itself is J.R.R. Tolkien's. So I'm going to read the first one of these just to give you a little flavor of what we're dealing with here. And one thing to note, another thing to note here is that he wrote this with the children of Húrin in mind, right? So he had written, a lot on the children of Húrin by this point, and he wrote this in an effort to explain the background mythology for the children of Húrin to somebody who's going to read the children of Húrin, right? All right, so this is section 1. After the dispatch of the 9 Valar for the governance of the world, Morgoth, demon of dark, rebels against the overlordship of Manwë, overthrows the lamps set up to illumine the world, and floods the isle where the Valar, or gods, dwelt. He fortifies a palace of dungeons in the north. The Valar remove to the uttermost west, bordered by the outer seas and the final wall, and eastward by the towering mountains of Valinor, which the gods built. In Valinor they gather all light and beautiful things and build their mansions, gardens, and city. But Manwë and his wife Brithil have halls upon the highest mountains, Tembrinting, or Tendbrinting in English, Tingvitil in Gnomish, Taniquetil in Elfin, whence they can see across the world in the dark to the dark east. Ifan Balarin plants the 2 trees in the middle of the plain of Valinor outside the gates of the city of Valmar. They grow under her songs, and one has dark green leaves with shining silver beneath, and white blossoms like the cherry from which a dew of silver light falls. The other has golden-edged leaves of young green like the beech, and yellow blossom like the hanging blossoms of laburnum, which give out heat and blazing light. Each tree waxes for 7 hours to full glory, and then wanes for 7. Twice a day, therefore, comes a time of softer light, when each tree is faint and their light is mingled. So, pretty familiar for us there in terms of the mythology, but we see a lot, condensed into one paragraph here. So one thing that stood out to me, was that the wife of Manwë is Bridhil here, Bridhil. So that is much different from Varda, right?
Yes,
So
I would agree.
so that was obviously a change that took place at some time further down the line. But yeah, that's a little flavor. So you're going to get that, that kind of looks summary form, with the rest of it, not very dramatized, but just kind of laying out, the facts of what has happened, of what's preceded, right? So it's kind of like previously on the Children of Hurin, right? And it's like first part, second part. So it would be a pretty long previously, but that's kind of the idea.
That's helpful, though, I think.
I think it's very helpful,
Yeah.
and this is a chapter. Honestly, I'd like to, I think it'd be fun to deal with in some depth. I think a lot of the chapters in here are actually like that, because it'd be interesting to look at how you could do a pretty easy comparison between different sections of this with how things were and are in the published Silmarillion, to see how they developed over time.
Definitely.
So yeah, chapter 3 is titled the Quenta. All right, so. Let me get there. It is page 92 in here. Read a little of the intro from Christopher. This work is extant in a typescript made by my father, for which there is no trace of any preliminary notes or drafts. That the Quenta, or at any rate the greater part of it, was written in 1930 seems to me to be certainly deducible. After a quite different initial section, which is the origin of the Valinor, this text becomes a reworking and expansion of the sketch of the mythology, and it quickly becomes evident that my father had the sketch in front of him when he wrote the Quenta. The latter moves towards the Silmarillion in its published form, both in structure and in language. Ariel is mentioned both in the title of Quenta and at the end of the work, and is coming to Quarterion, but there is no trace of the Cottage of Lost Play. So the Cottage of Lost Play gets phased out, right? It's no longer a part of really much of a part of the Legendarium after the earlier writings. As I have said of its absence, this does not demonstrate that my father had rejected the conception in its entirety. In sketch, he may have omitted it because his purpose was solely to recount the history of the elder days in condensed form, while in the title of Quenta it is said that the work was drawn from the Book of Lost Tales, which Ariel of Lythian wrote. At least then, we may think, some venue in which the Lost Tales were told to Ariel and Quarterion still existed. So it's not necessarily that Tolkien completely rejected it, but it doesn't play as... It doesn't... You can see how Tolkien, in trying to explain these things, is not necessarily relying too heavily on the frame narrative anymore, and as he doesn't have to rely on that anymore, it maybe becomes less convenient to explain it to people using the frame narrative, right? The frame narrative in his mind might become a little bit, seem confusing to others. Okay. The title makes it very plain that while the Quenta was written in a finished manner, my father saw it as a compendium, a brief history that was drawn from a much larger work, and this aspect remained an important element in his conception of the Silmarillion properly so called. I do not know whether this idea did indeed arise from the fact that the starting point of the second phase of the mythological narrative was a condensed synopsis, but it seems likely enough from the step-by-step continuity that leads through from sketch through Quenta to the version that was interrupted towards its end in 1937. Long story short, this is a little bit of an expanded version of the sketch here that we looked at with the last chapter, and yeah, so it's developing, but we can see how a lot of these a lot of the stories in Tolkien's mind were much longer stories. Had we see that like things like the Children of Hurin, the Tale of Tenuviel, these had the potential to be like novel length stories, right, in his mind. But he also felt the need to connect he was feeling increasingly the need to connect all these things together into one work that kind of saw them as a complete history of the early ages of Middle-earth, right, the early Legendarium of Middle-earth. So that's the work he was doing, in this period, and that Christopher focuses on in this book. This is also 19 brief passages. So I'm just going to read a little bit of actually what I've highlighted here, but you can see here that he's added on. So what I read from the last chapter was from the very beginning of that. He's added on more about what takes place. What we're familiar with is like the Valinor, what takes place before, before that, like kind of opening history when the Valar are already in Middle Earth, right? So he's trying to explain a little bit more of what took place before that. After the making of the world, but you know what? I'm going to read the title here too. The Quenta herein, the Quenta herein is Quenta Noldorwina, or Penas na Negolaeth. This is the brief history of the Noldoli or Gnomes, drawn from the Book of Lost Tales, which Ariel of Lythien wrote, having read the Golden Book, which the Eldar called Parma Kuluina, in Cortirion and Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Isle. After the making of the world by the All-Father, who in Elvish tongue is named Iluvatar, many of the mightiest spirits that dwelt with him came into the world to govern it, because seeing it after it was made, they were filled with delight at its beauty. These spirits the elves named the Valar, which is the powers, though men have often called them gods. Many spirits they brought in their train, both great and small, and some of these men have confused with the Eldar or elves. But wrongly, for they were before the world, but elves and men awoke first in the world after the coming of the Valar. Yet in the making of elves and men, excuse me, and in the giving to each of their especial gifts, Iluvatar alone had part. Wherefore they are called the children of the world, or of Iluvatar. So, and he goes on, the chieftains of the Valar were 9, and goes on to explain more about them there. And then it really proceeds in giving, that history, that kind of history of the rest of the early ages of Middle-earth, early periods of Middle-earth. So, yeah, bringing it all together, synthesizing all of these things into one cohesive, overall cohesive narrative seems to be that big goal with these writings. Chapter 4 is the first Silmarillion map. So for those of you who are map people, this is fun. He includes facsimiles of these things here, so you can kind of check out what Tolkien was working on. Just to give a little bit of what Christopher had to say about this. This map was made on a sheet of examination paper from the University of Leeds, as opposed to an exercise book, Greta. So, which suggests that it originated in association with the lay, or perhaps rather with the sketch of the mythology which was written to accompany it. On the other hand, some names which seem to belong with the first making of the map do not appear in the texts before the Quenta. Though it was not drawn initially in a way that would suggest that my father intended it to endure, it was his working map for several years, and it was much handled and much altered. Names were embedded in places recited. The writing is in red ink, black ink, green ink, pencil, and blue crayon, often overlaying each other. Lines representing contours and others representing streams tangle with lines for redirection and lines canceling other lines. But it is striking that the river courses as drawn on this first map were scarcely changed at all afterwards. And there's more to be said of it. But basically, in this chapter, Christopher refers to the map that he includes and then talks about the different places named on it. So that's chapter 4 for you. Chapter 5, the Ambarkanta. This is titled Of the Fashion of the World. It's basically a cosmology. And this is actually attributed to Rumil, who is another character from the Cottage of Lost Play. So we can see there's still these vestiges of that frame narrative that are hanging on, that are still important in Tolkien's mind, which again does make an interesting question of whether it should have been published with a frame narrative around it in the first place, right? When Christopher eventually published it in 1977.
Where would that frame narrative have come from, though? I know it was part of the Book of Lost Tales, but where you're talking about having published the Silmarillion, right, with a frame narrative. So are you saying that he should have used the frame narrative that's presented in the Book of Lost Tales and then use that in the Silmarillion? Or
I'm not saying he should have necessarily. I'm just saying that it would be interesting how that would have changed, who that would have changed. I mean, we've talked about this, right?
We have, yeah. I was just wondering if that was the particular frame narrative that you were referring to. Was the Cottage of Lost Play one? That
one, or I like the idea of doing one, obviously, that has some more familiar, relatable characters, solving the problem of no hobbits in the Silmarillion, where what if you just had the hobbits telling these stories, right?
Gotcha.
Based on things they had heard later on.
That's right, yeah.
So, or speaking with hobbits and other characters we were already familiar with. I think that would have been really interesting.
And that's maybe something Christopher could have written, or he could have hired someone to write.
Well, yeah, could have.
I know we're talking very speculatively here.
Yeah.
I feel like I hadn't said a whole lot, so I just wanted to interject a little bit.
It's no, I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to keep you from interjecting.
I know you're not. Yeah.
But it's just the nature of doing a survey of this kind of work.
Sure.
So
yeah. I just
So,
didn't want the patrons to miss me. That's
oh, well,
all of our listeners.
you know what? If you come on and watch us on YouTube, then you can,
You'll know I'm here, even though I'm not speaking.
you can see all of the contributions of her curious expressions and confusion as I walk through some of this stuff. So.
Confusion is probably the predominant
Right.
expression on my face right now.
Right.
Anyways,
Yeah. Well,
back to the subject at hand.
I mean, I don't think I'm too much less confused than you are. It's a lot, right? And I mean, I haven't read every detail of these works. I've just kind of been skimming each of the chapters, trying to get a feel for what's located in each chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
Speaking of maps, just real quick. I mean, there's this facsimile of the first Silmarillion map. And then there's some different diagrams that are interesting too. So this is a kind of a fun, if you are that map, if you like that visual kind of representation of this world, you wonder what Tolkien's own early conceptions of it looked like. There are 3 diagrams. In addition to the earliest Silmarillion map, there are 3 diagrams and then 2 other maps, right? And they're pretty interesting, right? So one of the maps gives a full view of the entire world of Arda, right, as Tolkien envisioned it, and gives some notes on that. And one of them gives a representation of what the world would have looked like, I believe. So this would have been after, I believe this would have been after Melkor threw down, Morgoth threw down the lamps. But yeah, and then there's 3 diagrams in here as well that are worth checking out that seem to be applicable to Ambarkanta, so which is chapter 5. So Ambarkanta is chapter 5. We talked about Rumil. And it's the title of it, the subtitle of it is Of the Fashion of the World. So a little snippet from this. About all the world are the Ilu Rambar, or walls of the world. They are as ice and glass and steel, being above all imagination of the children of earth, cold, transparent, and hard. They cannot be seen, nor can they be passed, save by the door of night. Within these walls the earth is globed. Above, below, and upon all sides is Vaya, the enfolding ocean. But this is more like to sea below the earth, and more like to air above the earth. In Vaya, below the earth, dwells Ulmo. Above the earth lies the air, which is called Vista, and sustains birds and clouds. Therefore it is called above Fanyamar, or cloud home, and below Iwenore, or birdland. But this air lies only upon Middle Earth and the inner seas, and its proper bounds are the mountains of Valinor in the west, and the walls of the sun in the east. Therefore clouds come seldom in Valinor, and the mortal birds pass not beyond the peaks of its mountains. But in the north and south, where there is most cold and darkness, and Middle Earth extends nigh to the walls of the world, Vaya and Vista and Ilmin float together and are confounded. So, this is kind of a cosmology. It's giving an idea of like kind of how early peoples might have understood this world, and the names for the different kind of elements of the world in an ancient fashion. So in a way, it's like elvish science, right? Like how would they have understood this world that they were in? So
Where's the title come from? Did I miss that?
I think it means the shape of the world, or the fashion of the world, right? So
In Elvish?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if it's translated.
It's just a cool
here
word that I've never
specifically.
I was wondering
It is a cool word. I agree.
where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be cool to name something. I don't know what you name Ambarkanta, but
Well, I think you could name a pet Ambarkanta, but
Mhm.
you would have to shorten it somehow.
Bark.
There you go. Perfect.
Name a dog.
Ambarkanta. Just call him Bark.
Just call him Bark. Barkley.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Now I have to get a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or we could be highly ironic and just name a cat Ambarkanta and call it Bark.
Mm-hmm. Right on.
Yeah. Or a bird.
Man, you're really giving it the old college try on making the contributions for this episode.
Trying. I'm really trying. I feel like I've spent more time drinking water than talking on this episode. So.
Yeah, I kind of had a feeling this one would be like that, because it is, there. It's not that there's not a lot to discuss, but given that I have not really put any reading assignments on you for this series
Which
because
I do appreciate, by the way.
Because I mean, I'm coming like it's a lot, right? And just prepping for it and figuring out what to highlight for our listeners is enough work for me, and I kind of want you to come into it fresh and just chime in with whatever you think.
That's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate it because I think if you had given me reading assignments, my brain cells would have exploded.
It is hard mental work. It is hard. This like going through this series is hard mental work, no doubt. My brain, as I prepare my notes for these episodes, typically, and just trying to do a survey, my brain at the end of preparing the notes for each episode is kind of just hurts
a little
bit.
mushy.
So, yeah, for reals. So mental exercise. There you go.
It's good for you.
I take the pain for you guys. Mm-hmm. That's right.
I get my mental exercise by playing Wordscapes.
Patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Wordscapes is cool.
Yeah,
too.
Wordscapes is cool. That's what Greta says. This episode brought to you by Wordscapes.
I'm just saying, you're not the only one that's getting a mental exercise.
You know what I play? I play Gardenscapes, I think.
Yeah, are they related? They
I don't
must
know.
Be somehow.
All them scapes.
Well, I
think it's called Gardenscapes.
It is called Gardenscapes. I've seen you play it before.
Yeah.
Mine's the one I do is Wordscapes.
It's basically puzzles of fruit and stuff.
Yeah, see, I don't like puzzles. Puzzles make my brain hurt.
But what's cool about it is you get to it's got a frame narrative. You basically get to create this awesome garden like around as you finish a puzzle, you get to do like tasks to build up this garden. I'll have to show you my garden sometime.
I'd love to see your garden.
Man, I feel like a complete nerd admitting this to you guys. No, this is like I just like the puzzles, so this is like in making the cool gardens is just kind of the icing on the cake. So now you guys know what I do with all my free time.
Too bad we can't make it a real garden. That would be more. That would be more fun for me.
Yeah,
because then I could arrange flowers in a vase. Anyway.
Well, you're the garden person.
I know.
But I'm doing. I've been out here getting some things cleaned up. Allergies have just been bad. The pollen's been bad. All right.
Rabbit trail much?
Man, this has been you got us on that rabbit trail. It's your fault.
Well, you're the one who started talking about mental exercise.
Here comes the bad ratings.
Oh,
all these people ever do, they don't even talk about Tolkien. They just talk about gardenscapes, and video games, and naming dogs.
Well, they're not talking about wordscapes and gardenscapes. They're reading from a book. I don't get to hear Greta talk.
All right. Well, let's finish this thing up.
All right, let's do it.
Chapter 6 is the earliest Annals of Valinor. So here's a little bit of what Christopher has to say. I refer to this work as the earliest Annals of Valinor because it was followed later in the 1930s by a second version, and then, after the completion of The Lord of the Rings, and very probably in 1951 to 52, by a third entitled The Annals of Aman, which, though still a part of the continuous evolution of these annals, is a major new work, and which contains some of the finest prose in all the matter of the elder days. These earliest Annals of Valinor are comprised in a short manuscript of 9 pages written in ink. This is a good deal of emendation and interpolation, some changes being made in ink, and probably not much, if any, later than the first writing of the text, while a second layer of change consists of alterations in faint and rapid pencil that are not always legible. These latter include 2 quite substantial passages, given in note 14 and 18, which introduce wholly new material concerning events in Middle-earth. So, kind of like what we had with the sketch and then the Quenta and chapters 2 and chapter 3, is kind of a summary, but this is even, in my mind, even more enjoyable because it's written as in a similar way to what we get with Appendix B in Lord of the Rings, right? Where it's that like chronology, it's a tale of the years, right? Mm-hmm. So we're actually given years to attribute to all these things. That's really cool in the case of the Silmarillion, because in the Silmarillion itself, we don't really have a timetable, right? We don't really know like how much time elapses, especially early on. So with this chapter, the earliest Annals of Valinor, we have something of Tolkien's mind about how much time was actually elapsing in the in the period really before the First Age, right? From the creation of the world and the Valar entering the world, all the way to the darkening of Valinor, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it starts out it starts out with kind of the synopsis of how things began with the Iluvatar and creating the Valar. And then this is really interesting. A little bit later, it says, "Time was counted in the world before the sun and moon by the Valar according to ages. And a Valian age hath 100 of the years of the Valar, which are each as 10 years are now." So from that, it makes it sound like a Valar year is 10 of our years, right? 10 normal years. Okay, so it would be a decade. And then an age, a Valian age, is 100 decades, right? So 1,000 years, so basically a millennium. Now, that's what but you can get tripped up when you read the timetable because it uses years like 500, Valian year 500, Valian year 1,000. But if that's Valian year 500, that's actually human year 5,000. Valian year 1,000 would be human year 10,000. And this thing extends through almost 3,000 Valian years, right? Which means how many total human years? 30,000, right? So the time from the creation of Arda until the darkening of Valinor, right? Roughly the darkening of Valinor, we're talking 30,000 years, right?
It's a lot.
A long time. Okay. So, if I don't know of anywhere else, we may see this in later works of the history of Middle Earth, but I don't know anywhere else where Tolkien contradicts that. So when we look at the Silmarillion, the indication we have is that his mind was to think that this was roughly a 30,000 year period, leading up to the darkening of Valinor was a roughly 30,000 year period, right?
Okay.
So in our own human years. And that's borne out in this chapter. So this one's particularly interesting for those of you like me who like timetables and like understanding how much time has elapsed in these various stories. You're gonna get a good sense of what Tolkien had in mind with that.
Especially if you're good at math.
Well, and you don't really even have to be good at math. He kind of lays it out. Let me see if did I mark this here? He gives there's a table in here actually, and I don't think I marked the actual page of it, but here we go. So he actually gives a table in Valian years, and then says, and then what sun years would be. So he calls in man years, he calls them sun years, right?
Okay.
And so 2993 being the doom of Mondos in Valian years, and then in the years of the sun, it would be 29,992, right? Let's see, the landing of the Feanorians and the encampment in Mithrim, right? Which would be their, when they come to Beleriand, right? 2995 in Valian years, 29,995 in sun years.
Why the difference?
That's just how they reckoned it. I mean, that, Valar are gods, so for them,
they're basically outside of time.
Well,
right?
They're not outside of time, but they live for. They're immortal, right? So they in their mind too, they might have been in the halls of Iluvatar before they actually entered the world for millions of our years, for all we know, right? We have no idea how long that period was. I mean, let me just check here. So, how long was the beginning year, before year zero that's listed in this table? We don't really have a sense of that. But, they're immortal beings, so as opposed to our mortality, so they reckon, they live for much longer. Their existence has existed for much longer than ours has, right? So they account these things much longer, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's an arbitrariness to all the, scales of time and that kind of thing, of course, but that's the scale they used. And
it's kind of like how we reckon like human years and dog years.
Yeah, but of course,
similar.
But of course, our human year. So the arbitrariness goes away in this, and that our human year is how long it takes for the Earth to orbit the sun, right? So, so that's where our kind of concept of the year came from in human terms, right? But for the Valar, for those first 30,000 years, there was no sun. Right?
Oh,
there was no sun.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So, where did that time come from? And maybe I'm missing something in the note in this chapter. There may be some explanation as to why they had that certain period of time fixed as a Valian year and then a Valian age. But I didn't find that in the text in my surveying it. So,
Cool.
yeah,
All right.
a good question.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the last chapter, chapter 7, is the earliest annals of Beleriand. So this would come after the Noldor come to Beleriand, and this is the period where that roughly corresponds to like chapter 10 on in the Silmarillion. What's really interesting is that if the first 10 chapters were roughly a 30,000 year period, this, according to the Annals of Beleriand, is a roughly 250 year period, so much shorter, right? So that first age, what we're accustomed to thinking of as the first age of Middle Earth, is 250 years, as opposed to 3,000 years for the second and third ages. So anyway, I find that interesting that all those stories took place in a relatively short period of time, right? In that 250 year period. So at least according to the earliest Annals of Beleriand. I think that timetable may have been expanded a little later. I don't have the reference in front of me, but I feel like there was an indication that it was longer at a different time. But yeah, so the earliest Annals of Beleriand are basically the same kind of thing laid out in these years, according to what events took place in those years. So something like Appendix B of Lord of the Rings. So read a little snippet from this. All right. So we'll say year 20. Feast and games of reuniting were held at Non Tathrine, the land of willows near the delta of Sirion, between the elves of Valinor returning and the dark elves, both those of the western havens, Brithombar and Eldorest, and the scattered wood elves of the west and ambassadors of Thingol. A time of peace followed. So there you go.
Okay.
Right on.
I like peace.
Yes. So that, listeners, is the Shaping of Middle Earth. So little summary for you. Got it, Greta?
As much as I'm ever going to get it. Yes.
Well, that might not be as much as you ever get it, but,
For the time being.
hopefully it's a good introduction for you.
No, it is. It's a very thorough introduction. Thank you for that.
Yeah, on episode 238, we'll survey Volume 5, The Lost Road and Other Writings. All right. So, all right. Well, so I think we're going to, based on time, we're kind of working on a short schedule this week. So I think we're gonna save our correspondence that we're planning on for next time. We'd love to hear from you, as always. TolkienRoadPodcast@gmail.com, TolkienRoad.com, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And we will be getting back to you with episode 238 on Volume 5, The Lost Road and Other Writings, next time. So
sounds good.
All right. Thanks to our amazing patrons, especially the following: Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien,
Lise U,
Andrew T,
John R,
Ms. Anonymous,
Shannon S,
Brian O,
Emilio P,
Zeke F,
James A,
James L,
Chris L,
Chuck F,
Azia V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D,
Eric S,
Joey S,
Eric B,
Matt L,
Johanna T,
Sam N,
Mike M,
Du Renayer,
Robert H,
Paul D.
and Jacob S,
Thanks, guys.
as well as Jonathan D, who celebrates his patron anniversary this month.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks to all of you, and thanks to our listeners as well, and we will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.